가래 지도다 되는 신에 도대 공대인지 롱지 타네 당보도 도대 공대 나라 군다 좀 무슨 알아 봤어 이 공대래 나바도 그 주요 지기 콜라 나라도 군다 콜라 체주다만 손은 직상구아 나바도 그 주요 지기 알리 가소리 되지 나바도 그 주요 군다비 체니기 네스 두지기 체마 숨쉬어 버렸어 다 됐어 고 군다시 다사지 거라 다사 거라 시왕고 샤고 시왕고 샤도 시왕 될라 제주 숨대 샤버레스 나바도 주유 방발레 송아스 군다비 ten이기네 시신 니레 송아스 두지기 체마스 군다 다시 시공을 송아레스 그냥 군다고 또배 파 샤가 제발라 다사지 거랑 랍사이 시지 거라 그 시고라 시왕도 시왕도 군다 인스기어 말다 오 독생 알리 티체주 숨대세 시왕 체주 숨대 문징 제버레스
This is a little hard for me, but anyway, we're going to talk first about constructs and what the meaning of a construct is. And then he said, let me think about it. We have to decide. We haven't gotten into yet the question of whether or not concepts are useful, whether or not concepts are good or bad. We haven't evaluated the content of constructs. So first we'll be going into the group called constructs. And then there are three different characterizations of constructs from the sutra where the Buddha explained what he really had in mind. And those are explained, given on page 22, beginning from about the 8th line from the bottom. And then there are three characterizations of constructs given. One is called Nambartope Chuyu, and I'm not going to even attempt to I'll just translate what the words are, and then we'll get into the meaning of it, which means that object towards which imagination does its thing. Okay, that object towards which imagination functions. Then the second one is the characteristic which is the place of imagination. Okay, and then the signs of something which is a factor. Now those don't mean anything to me so far. They're just three expressions, but those are used to describe constructs. And then Geshe-la says, remember that constructs are directed towards Shenwang. Constructs are directed towards things which grow from their causes, things which are dependent. So even though constructs are not dependent things, they are directed towards dependent things. So there's a relationship between constructs and dependent things. And I don't quite understand it myself, because what he's saying is that constructs apply, or constructs are used, or constructs are directed towards dependent things. So hopefully he'll explain it further. And so that these three characterizations of constructs are stressing the fact that they apply to or are directed towards dependent things.
다 진짜 시황 콜랑 알아서 지난 시황 뭐 인제 그거 시황 딱 알아서 시황 찍 지내는 그거 랑가 로디 그래서 다그 랑은 단다 될 때는 수 콜랑 시황 수 알아서 수자 지루시 수고 시황을 되게 수고 제주 숨된 거 시황 세다 제주 숨 거. 군다 다서 시황 콜 수직 시황 시황 안 갈래요 그럼.
So in order that you can understand the idea of these three features of constructs, how they apply to a dependent thing, we'll take an actual example, and it'll be easier to see how these three features of constructs apply to dependent things. So let's take the dependent thing called suk. Suk in Tibetan can either mean all physical matter in general, or it can also mean the object of the eye, meaning shapes and colors together. And Geshe-la introduces this suk as saying, the one, for example, that goes along with sound, smells, taste. That clarifies that it's the one that refers to what you see with your eyes, shapes and colors. So we're going to take the example of shapes and colors, visual objects, and then we're going to examine how these three features of constructs somehow are directed at or applied to the things which we see with our eyes.
타고 따당 거나 가르쳐는 수다고 거나 자소는 수를 따가는 똑바로 따는 가르쳐는 수 시신이 수 코랑라 수 신이 깨져질라 그래 봤어. 시기야 그래 봤어. 똑배에서는 리수 레샤 냠도 똑바지에 등기를 봤어. 타 진사의 시코라 가르쳐서는 수랑 샤. 네. 인사 시고라 오다 수디 샤고라 와서 오 틴데지 거네 알타 로브 지네 틴데지 거네 틴데지 뒤서 수기 몰라 군다 주세 수기 모이고 샤네 군다 조단지 군다 다주지 샤바레
So this is getting difficult, but it's okay, I think. Visual objects, we say constructs are directed at visual objects, first of all, in the following way. When you see some kind of shape or color, let's say you just see some visual object, and then in your mind you think to yourself, this is a visual object, this is a visual object, and you think to yourself that, then in a sense you are labeling it with a construct. You are labeling it with your imagination or with your conceptual mind. You are labeling it with conception. And then when you do that and you say to yourself, oh, this is a visual object, this thing here is a visual object, in a way you're laying a construct on it. And that's the first characterization of constructs, is that you lay them on physical objects, on the very essence or the very nature of physical objects. So we're not talking about characteristics of the physical object. We're just saying that state of mind which labels the object. Oh, this is a visible object. This is an example of a visible object, and that is the first characterization. That's the first way in which constructs apply to changing things, to label their essence or to label their very nature by saying, oh, this is a visual object.
타고 수고랑 뭐 내서 지나 뭐 내서 되나 예봐야래 채봐야래 미탁봐야래 대하러 하여튼 수고 대상다 수고 디 인가 채라와 수고 디 인가 채 타고 수랑 알아봤어 그래서 수세 깨쳐라면 깨라와 삼로지기 수레샤 이제는 딱딱 되게 지가 타고 수고 예반이래샤 채반이래샤 미탁반이래도와 타고는 콜 두주니 콜 백미수니 수디 개바레 수디 체바레 수디 미다바레스야 깨짜데 랍초고도 와세 게 랍은도 드라이 랍당 거레 네 한 삼무지기 수디 개바레샤 수디 체바레샤 수디 미다바레샤 다 찍을 때니 그 찍기는 게 숨지 시게 찍기는 디기리스다 오 독지 셰드다 수코랑 몰라 맞이는 수기 개주지 안에 개체 시에송아스 수고체 수기 띵이 제하고 수기 개주자 네 이따가도 코레 개주자 그래서 이 수기 제발해서 수디 제발해서 삼도 독지 찍진 소나 근데 근데 진원에서 근데 지기 않은 수기 제발라 그다 아니
Then the second way in which constructs are applied towards changing things, or things which depend on other things, is that if we don't talk about conceptualizing or thinking about the very essence or the very nature of the thing, this is not the previous one that we spoke about, where your mind, your conceptualizations are saying, oh look, this is a visual object, and where your conceptualizations are labeling it and identifying it, oh, this is a visual object. In the second way in which conceptualization relates to physical changing objects is in the case of, and Geshe-la puts forth this thing on his bed and says, let's take this thing as a visual object. And then your mind is suppose your mind is now saying, and you're also saying actually in your speech, oh, you know what, this particular object is something that was created. This particular object is something that grew or started. This particular object is something which is changing all the time and will eventually be destroyed. And when you say that in your words, you also think it in your mind. So there's a state of mind that looks at the visual object and is thinking about it, certain characteristics or certain features of the visual object. Is thinking, this visual object was created by something. This visual object grew or started. This visual object is changing all the time. And that state of mind, conceptualizing the visual object, not in terms of its very nature or its primary identity, but rather in terms of its different features. That conceptual state of mind, that constructs by which you understand or which you label it as having different features, is the second way in which concepts or constructs apply to shenwang, things which are dependent.
캐치가 막 수크라라는 팀에 캐치 막 씹어져 알았어요. 나도 제발다고 전 찍기를 찍라. 그 시에나 뒤 리쿼드 산이데 제게바 수미다과 수다 되니 가르게 지금 시에라도 수 옆바 시에라는 오다 깡갈로 캐치라 줬다 제발 리쿼드 키나
Then if you take this, you carry the same example. This is an example of a state of mind in which you are viewing and labeling and conceiving and conceptualizing the different features of an object. And we can go on to other features. You could say, this thing started, this thing was created, this thing is changing, which implies this thing is momentary, changing by the moment, and even that this thing exists. To think to yourself that this thing is something which exists is viewing a feature of it, is labeling or conceiving of it with different features. And just as you understand it with a single object, if you consider a single object and then take it that way, you can go on to other objects as well. You don't have to. You aren't restricted to a visual object. This can apply. So any state of mind in which labels or conceives or has constructs relating to the features of an object, of a changing object, is what we call the second distinction of constructs, which relates to dependent things.
Yes. Ta dindre chigla ta kunan thanda di ando dode konde ne keje sheta ta ro jiong sa te ta sheta ta le amane ta ji ando the ando ta thanda di keje di dode konde na le yani me ta ngado yan di keje di kan ji keje shi gu di shi ni sa ni che yani me ji bi yin ran du ba je ba di kan yi ma de sum chu dumba den duwa dumba ta je ban ji du kun da tin woni ma ni kan yi na si duwa dode konde le si ta da yin ran gu ting ting gu ba de le gu ba de ne mai ta ma de le shi song so si te pa da dode konde ji kun da mo sung dang shung gu de le si ta ro ji che ta ji ne ta de ju ba ma zhen san zhe
we are 7 lines from the bottom is where the quotation begins from the sutra where the Buddha explains the intent of all his sutras, and we're going down to the last line of page 22, and it's in that chunk of sutra where Lord Buddha identifies the different features or identifies what it is to be a construct or how constructs work.
Ta yage ta ma yage chi ta ya chi ta de me ali ya chi chi ya chi du yage de la su ta ko la che chu sum den cha re na ba to bi chu wen da bi chi ni ne du ji ki cha ma xiang che chu sum den na ba to bi chu yu se na ka re se na xi chu se gang ga le ye zai gang ga lo ko na ma ra du mi xi cha ma lo so di ju ma ba sam lo ma dang ga chi xian da ji ge to ba ji ge gang ne sam su dang xian gang ga lo sam dang tu gen cha re se dang ga be ye na ne che so na to bi yu le se ta yin ge xiang go na ba to bi chu yu se na to bi yu le se ta che chu ta bo ko li
then the very first, we're going to jump ahead, we'll skip past the actual sutra quotation, we'll go back later and talk about it word for word, but right now we'll skip ahead and we'll think about what is the actual meaning of those 3 characterizations of constructs. So what are the 3 ways in which constructs are described? The first one is called Namrto Pichuyu, and Geshe-la says, if you think about it, everything in the world relating to changing things, all changing things, when we think about it, just when you think about them, in scripture it's called the object of conceptual thought. So when you think about them and you form a picture of them and you're thinking about them in a certain way and you conceptualize them, that's the first attribute or the first feature of how constructs relate to changing things.
Gunda bi chen ji ne su de zang gunda da sai xi wo gan de gunda se da sai xi wo re se da gan de gunda da gan wo su da ge se ne ya men de da ji pa da ge ji ji de ji de ni ri da ge re ya men de to pa ji pa ne yong che ni ji ji le sha ne se to pa ji da ge ye da da to pa ni mo ti gun da gan wo che 但是喜欢向往这个下个他那个树下树了大概有这树的开始呢滚大几千滚大比就是开始那么多就滚大比千年是滚大比千年呢是大赛西是那解决你们
那是解决的滚大个解决是个吗向往的解决那是那是then secondly I'm having trouble translating okay but just to be frank about it secondly changing things have a second quality. Now he's clarifying that these are qualities of changing things which relate to how they are constructed. Okay, or how these are qualities of changing things that relate to how they are conceptualized by this constructing state of mind. So the second one would be the process of labeling. So the second feature of changing things which relates to how they are conceptualized by constructs, is that they are labeled. And they are labeled in two ways. They are the basis of the label. They are the thing which is labeled by concepts. So concepts are a state of mind, constructs are a state of mind, and they are labeling something something. So the thing that gets the label, the thing that is labeled, are changing things, shenwang. And the labeler is kuntak's state of mind, which is making a construct or conceptualizing that object. And the second feature of changing things that relates to constructs is how they are labeled. Labeled in two ways. First of all, labeled by words. Okay, so you use a word like, quote, visual object to describe a visual object in your words. And then along with the label called words comes a label called conceptualizing it a certain way. Oh, this is a visual thing. In your mind, you think about it as a visual thing. So the second feature of changing things that relates to how they are conceptualized or how they relate to constructs is that the constructing state of mind looks upon that particular object, which is called the thing which is labeled, and labels it with two different labels. One verbal almost, word, and one mental, meaning thinking of it in a certain way. And in Tibetan that's called that object which is given that object which has the characteristic of conceptualization about it. Meaning visual objects are the objects which are supplied a label in two ways by the constructing state of mind. How's that? Shenwangi Kenshi the third feature is easy. No problem with the third feature. I said third feature of what? He says third feature of changing things. You know, I thought we were on to conceptualizations, but we're supposed to be on to conceptualizations. But anyway, construct. Anyway, third one is easy. It's the feature, or in Tibetan it's called the indicators that the thing is a created thing. Okay, that the thing is a composed thing, or it has been produced. I should say a produced thing. Okay, so the third feature of changing things or dependent things is that they are composed. I'm sorry, no, I don't like the word composed. Produced. Okay, that they are produced by the coming together of causes and conditions. Okay, so that's the third feature of changing things. Not that's a true again. That's a shenwangi kechu sumo. Right now we're talking, although in general we're talking about constructs, at this moment we're only at the level of discussing changing things or dependent things and three features that they have. So the three features I just spoke about, he says, are relating to changing things. How that relates to constructs we're going to get into right now. But we're generally on the subject of constructs, but right now we just had three characteristics of changing things. Now how that ties into constructs we're going to get to right now. So we're discussing, and I have to clarify, so the first characteristic here is that looking at changing things as being the object towards which conceptualization functions. It's the first one. Second one, looking at changing things as being the thing which conceptualization labels with names and thoughts. And then thirdly, looking at changing things as being things which are characterized by being produced. Okay, so those are the three qualities of changing things. Now he says, how does that relate to conceptualization? We're discussing changing things insofar as they are the object or the basis towards which conceptualization does its thing. So it's looking at changing things and it's having concepts or making constructs in its mind. So this is whole discussion is taking off the three features of changing things that we just described all relate to constructs in the sense that we're talking about changing things as the object or the what do you call it, the arena in which constructs do their thing, towards which the conceptual state of mind, the arena towards which in which it functions, performs its function.
Okay. 他现在滚大我现在就当问题小，该这现他滚大是滚大问题是滚大不开起来不是呢？第一多半第一可以数过了，第一数热下，伢们都三的，他多半个三的呢，这个来吧的吧，数过来呀，没应该，多半块呀，没应该，多半个三落当的，但白天抓不，就那个多比天气是，或者天气个来吧的。똑바 코라랑 사무시 땅 연데서 이야 수세 랍사티 딜라 랍기도 디 수세 랍사이 시테 레샤 삼베 삼로고 많이 맞체 삼로 콜라 프랑 유루서 찍고 나서 오타코 군다서 다 착보다리데 다 대군다
나서 대군다 이
오타코 군다 그래 나서 상황고에 지고 삼로 그 상황고라 때 그 수고라 때 야, 디 수세 랍사이 시테 레샤 삼로 de 삼로 de 삼로 코나 레샤 삼비 타고 임바 있어 삼로 코나 유지래 봐 진짜 사카라 내가 메인게 내가 메인게 이들 지래 봐 오 타고 군다세고 배지 디가
now how does that relate to constructs? How do those three features of changing things relate to constructs? The whole point is that there are three elements here. There's shenwang, which is changing objects, which are the arena in which the constructing or the conceptual state of mind is doing its thing. And then there's the conceptual state of mind which is acting towards that arena or acting in that arena of changing things. But then there's a third element, isn't there? You know, when you look at a visual object and you think in your mind, this is something to see, I'm seeing something. And the minute you start thinking that, you form a mental image. He says it's a lot like the Dunchi idea we have in the other schools, is where there's a Dopa Dunchi means that construct which the conceptual state of mind makes up or creates after working in the arena of changing things. So it focuses towards changing things as the arena of its function. And then it's a state of mind which is looking there, and it's a state of mind which is thinking to itself, oh hey, this is a visual thing. And the minute it starts doing that, there becomes a third element in between the two, which is a mental image of which it has made up. It's a construct of a visual thing, you know. So actually it's starting to look at this construct of visual thing rather than the thing in the arena in which it's doing its thing. And that is constructs. That is the first group. Those things, that third element in between the constructing state of mind and the arena in which it acts, that in between there are all those constructs or mental images that the mind is making up and ends up focusing on. And those are kundak, and that's how constructs relates to changing things, the features of changing things.
다디 된다 말아서 신나 진 된다 불자다 땅 소리 불자다는 세 말에 신도 뭐 비자제 또 하코 땅 소리 차 된다 거기 된다 땅만 지라 소리가 제가 마주 잘 다가라 다 뒤에 땅 소리 마블라 욕다 체조 디가네.
This single point that we just described is going to be the biggest hassle for, you know, this whole discussion. That last few sentences that we did is going to be the whole problem with the whole following section. We got to tear that apart, rip it apart. We have to clean it up in a sense. So what we've done so far is to drive a huge bulldozer into a forest and knock down a few trees. And they made a big mess. There's not like a clear plot of land right now. You just had a bunch of knocked down, smashed up trees. And now we got to do cleanup. We just got the main idea was just presented, but now there's a lot of cleaning up to do before we have the final product.
꽤 현아지간 직 친나 아니 파지 되지 빼지간 되지 네가 직 유튜브나 비상을 써야만 스타일이야.
I think we can clean up. I think we can. What is it called? There's a word in English. We can. There's a word in English. Make something more subtle or clean, or we can polish it. Yeah, we can polish this idea with an illustration, because right now all you've got is the arena in which the mind is acting, right, which is changing things, and then it's having some kind of a construct about it, which is very, very similar to the idea of a dunchi, a mental image, but it's not quite what you call a dunchi. Okay, so we gotta work it out a little bit. We have to polish this concept. You know, I brought up mental images, but it's a little bit more than just a simple mental image. So what you've got so far is this arena in which the conceptual state of mind is acting, you have the conceptual state of mind, and then you have something that it's creating, some kind of construct that it's creating. So it's a difference between a construct and mental image. We have to talk about it. And then we're going to try to use, in order to polish up these concepts or make them more refined, I was looking for the word refined. In order to refine these ideas, we're going to go to an illustration. We're going to use some kind of illustration in order to refine what we've spoken about so far. And I hope we can refine it.
안데다 고부디 테마 탑도 오라도 딱딱 도코랑 규제는 뒤에 딱딱 춤살로 와서 그런 것도 주바르티 다 뒤뒤서 신내야 콜니만 찍그로니 지는 신내 트라시스 민치다나 다 보고 다 신내 트라시스 민다돼서 다 트라시 디트라시 레샤 냠도 삼겐지 삼로 크나라 디부부티 트라시스 사이 고부부티 레샤 삼로티 보고 당마음에 공간에 게마 탑도 주소 양 신의 콜라타 민땅에 다 바바지 민땅에 시에나 다고 말와 바바다다 야 신의 다시 민땅데 야 당이 부다시 되레샤 삼로데 땅네 신의 다시세 그 민디랍사이 시고 티디레송 보고 게마다 불레송 다 대지가 삼로 땅네 지코사레
give you an illustration. So a man and a woman have a child. And the child is, you know, the woman's pregnant for a while, and then she has the baby, and right, you know, the second after the baby comes out, the baby's there. So there's a baby there. And then maybe a day later or two, we don't go around naming the baby. They don't come out in the hospital, pop out, and immediately you say, oh, this is the baby's name. You know what I mean? In Tibet, I don't know how it is in America, but they wait a day or two, and all the excitement's over, and then they think about what are we going to name this child, and then they name the child. And only on the second day or the first or second day afterwards, the father, who's normally the person who names the child, is looking at the child and saying, oh, we'll call this child Dashi. Okay, so we'll call this child Dashi. And only after that moment does everyone and the parents start conceptualizing or thinking of the child as Dashi. This is my child Dashi. This is my boy Dashi. Only after that naming process, only after the father has actually labeled the child, oh, this is Dashi, does everyone start having the conceptual state of mind that says, oh, now we have a kid. Now we have a kid named Dashi. Okay, now we have a child named Dashi. And even though they had a child the moment the baby came out of the womb, the moment the baby was born, they had a child. But now they kind of think more, you know, now I have a child named Dashi. You know, now I have this boy. Here's my boy, Dashi, you know. So it's only after the fact, in a sense, after the labeling has occurred, that they are saying to themselves, oh, now I have a boy named Dashi. So, very good. So, what do you guys think, okay? When we talk about the thing that got the name Dashi, the object which was given the name Dashi, did that object which was given the name Dashi exist right after the thing was born? Or did the object which was given the name Dashi exist only upon the naming of the thing as Dashi? So, when did the object named Dashi exist? Was it right after something was born? Or was it right after they decided to give it the name Dashi? Kashige Kematatu Bugu Dashi said, Kashige Dashiki Ming Dat Sane da Dashi Segi Shidi Dupshas. Kashige Kematatu Dashi Segi Ming Digi Shi Duptanes.
Shidi Dashi Dusai, Dashi Seneketa, Lapsai, Shidi, some girls. I mean, what came at the Lapsa Misunda di Puton de Yandi, Dashi say Put, some girls, some.
Ane, Kematatu. Okay, let's. He's going to change the question a little bit, or maybe I didn't translate it very well. But anyway, he says just after the kid is born, and before he's named Tashi, do people stand there and say, "Oh, Tashi's born"? No. Did I change my name?
Samsai Shiko, Kaso, Tashiko Tidis, Tashi, Dajusai Shiko, Pabe, Shine, Samotang, this Shine, Tashi, Shivi, Siki, Lapsai, Samina, Korea, what you do. Time is a Titashi Risha, Yam to Same, Samlo Tiki, Tashi, Dajubi, Tashi, Lapsai, Shipi, Inyambi, Samlo Kola Koye, Yul Soja. Kopai Puchin Goreto, Tekorang, Samlo Tangi.
No, so this is tough. So, so the object which is named with the name Dashi, although there was an object that existed right after the child was born, you don't call it the object which is named Dashi until the labeling, until he's actually called Dashi. So only upon calling him Dashi is there a thing that we can say, oh, this is the thing they call Dashi. And after that time, when there's that thought, oh, my boy is named Dashi, okay, and the idea of Dashi, when does that occur? And what is that like? And isn't it just sort of a construct existing between the object which is named Dashi and the father who's naming him Dashi? And then there's the idea of a boy named Dashi, okay? So do you see these kind of three elements? One is something which is getting the name. There's a child, there's a baby who's being called Dashi. That's the arena. Then there's the state of mind of the father actually saying, I'm going to name my boy Dashi now. And then there's this sort of a thing in the middle, isn't there, called the boy named Dashi. The thing which is the boy named Dashi is almost like a construct or an idea that's existing between the baby which got the name Dashi, the father who's naming him Dashi, and then there's this thing in the middle, isn't there? That did gili adi bazali Dashi to Yoris. So you got it? You got that thing in the middle? So you got it? You got the idea of this thing in between? You got this idea of the thing in between? Something which is not the state of mind which is naming it Dashi. Something which is not the baby which got the name Dashi, but something in between. Something like the baby with the name Dashi applied to it, and now this object called the baby named Dashi. So you got this third thing in the middle. Got that? Comfortable with that? Yes. You got it? Do you agree that there is a thing between there? You got to make some kind of... Yeah. So if you want to find something in the world that you can call, this is what we call a construct, this is what we call a kundak, that's it. That's the second one. That's that one in the middle. So, question, and give an answer, okay? I mean, this is, you gotta wake up. Does this thing in the middle exist? Is it an existent thing or a non-existent thing? Yobares.
Oh,
so you can call this a construct which is an existing thing. That seems to be implying something else, okay? This is what we call a construct which is an existing thing.
Oh, this is. Papa Mingmata on the Tashi Suchila some Gamara. She never Papa to Tango some Panget. How is it that Papa could some Madame Pukutiki Saro, Magic Chin? Into 다시 세크 다주 시기된 찍도아 게 코라 다시 보고 코라 춘춘도 주마 딱 그냥 볼람사 줍성어 시내 삼로지 땅네 그 슉들 줍성 가게 줍성
Listen. So again, consider the one in the middle, okay? Consider the construct called Tashi the boy, which is Tashi the boy. Just after the child was born, and there was a child there, and before the father had this idea, right? It was the father who had the first idea, right? The father it first occurs to this person. The father is the first one that it occurs to call this baby Tashi, and that's only like a day or two later, okay? So let's consider that process, and just before that process, or before, there did come a child out of the womb. There was a child there. There was some kind of basis there. At that moment, when the child first came out of the womb, was there a construct called Tashi the child? That came out of the kila de in the yomanes.
Oh, my lord, you that I eat that do see that then you do ask. Kopu Koran, the yam to Chumason ask. Matuba in the deed, Tashi, the key, the Daniel call. You rangi deluji timo maybe deluji wanted to be maybe now.
Oh, that's nice. So if you think about it, the construct didn't pop into existence when the kid was born. It's not like something that popped into existence with the bearing of the child. Okay, it's not like the child was born and the second the child was born, the construct pops up. Okay, now here's the cool part. That's an indication that construct is not one of those things which exist from its own side through its own unique nature. Remember we talked about that? So that's an indication of what it means when you say that this thing doesn't have a nature of existing from its own side through its own unique way of being. If you want to know what that particular phrase means, you just got it. Okay? It's that it didn't pop up simultaneously, linked along with the child when the child was born. And that's an indication that it doesn't fit that description of something which is existing from its own side through its own unique way of being.
What did you do? Hey, we call your by in the mango, ye did in your call troop the Maduta, call you the mail with Tandar, you the mail, rap, your by in the man, young man, call troop the Maduko. Didn't pass some congain till on the to go on the.
Nothing. Oh, this is really beautiful. So, the question of whether this thing has come into being or not, the middle one, right? The construct. The question of whether it has come into being or not. The question of whether it exists or not. The thing which imparts to it its existence. The thing which lends it its very existence. Can we say that it's the state of mind of the Father that's lending it or giving it its existence? Or do we say that it has some kind of unique existence of its own coming from its own side? Which one is it? Is it the toba digi kurangi yobasogi yones? Jubgi And that's what it and because it's the Father's conceptual state of mind which lends it its existence, that's what it means when we say, very, very famous in Buddhist philosophy, simply a product of a construct of the mind. Simply a projection, we say in the other classes, simply a product of the mind. And that's what it means when we say something is simply a product of mind, which is, by the way, always opposed to the idea of existing from its own side with its own unique nature. Okay? So this is the opposite of that, which is simply a product of the mind, simply a projection of the mind.
What would this? Time to that, how Diki de la Deniango, Tope, Shapare, Ma, Tope, Tava, Tamjire, Ma, to you, Rangi Dulu, you went to get. And but you don't make doing what to that Karamadu Sever. Rangi Tani, Madu Sever.
And so we've established, haven't we, that this thing in the middle, the construct, is something which is simply a projection or simply a construct of the mind. Simply a construct of the mind, simply a construct of your conceptualization. Okay? And we can say, therefore, that it's not like this other thing which has from its own side, right? It has from its own unique way of being from its own side. Okay? And that's what it means in this school when we say that this thing in the middle does not exist by definition. Does not exist by definition. There you go. That's exactly what it means.
That is. That's it.
Got it? say something. You gotta say something. Good.
rangi tenyi chuba se ko yota yo marwa iki del denyam ni rangi tenyi chuba se yo marte ko rangi tenyi chuba se dala oda senzambe ka jata sine o tengara umabe ko tela chin sona ani demba chuba se ko abuji cha nadina ni kanga ma ju se
be careful not to slip into the Madhyamika door, okay, and catch the following thing. The mind-only school says that's what it means when we say that this thing in the middle doesn't exist by definition. There you go. Okay? In the mind-only school, that's what it means when we say that something doesn't exist by definition. Now you got that feeling. Totally different from Madhyamika. Don't go into the Madhyamika door. Don't let yourself slip into Madhyamika. In the mind-only school, that's exactly what just how we describe the middle one, is exactly what we mean when we say that thing doesn't have a nature of existing by definition. Okay?
That is all.
Lying.
Oh, the rangi tenyi chuba ko yoke yota yo marwa se rangi tenyi chuba ko di de de rangi tenyi chuba ko yo marwa mo me de chuba yo ta khola ka tu sa de yo marte khola ming de ji ta be de ngaran zu min jing tu che ba na o ta chue ji ta semzambe ka cha ta o ta ni cha.
So if you think about it, there is no such thing as the middle thing which could exist from its own side with its own unique nature, right?
Yes.
No such thing is possible. But if there were such a thing as the thing in the middle which was existing from its own side with its own unique way of being, that would be the ultimate gakcha. That would be the ultimate thing which we deny when we talk of emptiness in the mind-only school. And that's what would be. If such a thing existed, then that would be, such an existence is what we deny when we say emptiness in the mind-only school. So there you've got, that is what we call the self-nature of objects, which is the ultimate object denied when we speak of emptiness in the mind-only school. Don't slip off into Madhyamika, please. Okay. Got it? Because it be ngema jindan betina umamamuti you know the big gawa to do did that semi of segidu
what looks it is ta ko mege ta da rangi tenyi chuba ko so ma ko rangi tenyi ide rangi tenyi chuba ko yota yo ma te ko kunda ji lo sha ah tela ya
oh boy the theoretical thing of the thing in the middle which existed from its own side through its own unique nature, which would mean a thing in the middle which existed by definition, is another kind of kuntan. Right? It's another kind of construct. The imagination of such a thing, the mental picture of such a thing, which is impossible, right? The mental picture of an impossible thing, of a thing which was a construct and which existed through its own unique way of being from its own side, and therefore existed by definition, that in itself is a construct, isn't it? So now we got a second kind of kundak, don't we? A second kind of construct, megika, and that's the kind that doesn't exist. That's a construct which doesn't exist. So there's two kinds of constructs, right? One which does exist, and one which doesn't exist, even with regard to the one in the middle. How do you feel? Got it?
It seems like the thing that it's referring to doesn't exist, but the
It's not the same construct. He was checking out your communicating form.
What looks it is? Kagi ting ta dena megen du an megen de kagi ting du ka kore sena me al duk ma thambo de duk se chen megen de wa rang ti kun di ji de ne yogen ko rang ting chu ba ji ko ta xiang gi ting xiang sena ta ta su sha ta su ting du ta ko ta du ta su ting du ta gi are ko minduk sila te su ting du minduk sila pare ta ko su ting du me pa me sam ko ni yo.
Nothing. Oh boy. Now we're getting into more detail on how changing things are acting as the arena or the basis in which we have all these ideas, okay? So, the fact that with regard to visual objects or changing things, we cannot say of them that our construct of them is something which comes from its own side in its own unique way of being, or which exists by definition. The fact that this one doesn't exist with regard to this is the totality of this, meaning the emptiness of this. Got it? So the fact that the self-existent construct doesn't exist with regard that this thing doesn't have a corresponding self-existent concept about it is its emptiness. That in itself, according to the mind-only school, is Yongdu, is what we call totality, is the third group in the mind-only school. Got it? So the fact that this thing, when you consider it as a thing that came from its, if you say, this, imagine a number 2, a concept, which came from its own side, had its own unique way of being, was not just something made up in my mind, which doesn't exist, right? That thing's impossible. The impossibility of that thing with regard to this thing is this thing's emptiness. Okay, that is the Yongdrup, or the third category of this thing, and that's how Shenwangs are so useful for getting the other two categories. See? Okay, that's how they act as the arena for describing the other two groups. Okay. So let's take another example. I got here a stick in my hand, stick of wood, okay? And can we, now perk up and give me some ideas here, okay? Can we characterize this in 3 different ways, given the conversation we just had? So show me these 3 characteristics, that this 3 features now of this thing. Give me 3 features of this thing.
It depends on causes.
Rangi, you give me you got them backwards. Can you give them to me straight? Nah. The cat is climbing down a ladder. Cats never go, like cats go the wrong way. Wrong order. But it's okay, we don't need order here. Huh? Don't forget these 3, we have these 3 characteristics. It's the arena,
the arena of changing things, and then the mental picture.
No, it's different thing. Remember we start out with 3 characteristics. He wants Chilp to try.
Okay, is the object towards which the conceptualized...
Number Tobichu Yang is that in the arena in which conceptualization is acting, is functioning. Yeah, so it fits the first feature, what we call the first feature. So forget the one in the middle, we're talking about the third one now. We're talking about the third one now, right? We're talking about the third one, the baby, before it got named Tashi. Not the concept, we're talking about the baby. 3 features of the baby. First of all, it is the arena in which conceptualization is acting. Okay, second one is the Kundakitsini Kine. Kundakitsini Kine, yeah.
It's the thing which it holds on to?
No, remember we had 2 labels. This is the labeling process, right? The second feature.
Yeah, I didn't quite see how that...
Nipa did it. Kundaki Tsiniki Nayan start. Mingda Dai Daksa did Till a back scratcher singer again.
Not going to English you must develop say she would have
it fits the second feature's description, because isn't it that thing which we name with the name bamboo stick or a stick of bamboo, and isn't it the thing which we conceptualize as a bamboo, and which we label with the thought or with the picture, this is a bamboo shing. So I'm not too good in English. You want to call it back scratching, whatever you call it. I don't know English language, but it is a stick. I'm calling it a stick. I have a word in verbally. I am naming it a bamboo stick, Mentally, I'm labeling it as a bamboo stick, and that's how it fits the second feature, in which being the arena or being the object which is labeled, okay, by concepts. Now the third one is easy. I mean, of course it has a third feature, which is it came from its causes and conditions. So those are the three features. First one was what? It's the arena in which conceptual mind works. Secondly, it is that object which receives the label of the mind and the word. And thirdly, it is something which has grown from its causes and conditions. So it fits the three features of a changing thing, of a dependent thing. Teach us some dusha. So now, having finished that, okay, we finished the three features. We got the stick. We got the state of mind which is calling it, oh hey, here's a stick, we got a stick here. We got a state of mind that's doing that. But during that process, there's a stick out here, there's a state of mind that's saying, hey, there's a stick here. Doesn't something, third thing, start forming in the middle, which is the mental image of a stick, and your mind is starting to produce some kind of construct, or some kind of conceptualization called a stick. And then your mind is starting to focus on this conceptualization. When it says, oh, stick, 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 there's stick, and then there begins a conceptualization in the middle. Doesn't there? Yeah. It's still there.
That is all. That's it. That is something that I do security. Lila, Numan, some town, Kudata, Xiawan. I take it and Tiara. The Numa Tigi, Kundas, Numa Kundas, that's what I mean. Kundas. How deep into Kundawa, you was it? Numa the Numa Reshan, and the Toby Shiko take your game. How could I tell you to make it? Make it what deep into Sineca, long that any new making.
Nothing. Oh boy. Okay. So you got this stick, don't you? That's the object in which your conceptualizations are, the arena in which your conceptualizations are working. Then you have the conceptual state of mind. And as you start focusing on it and thinking, here's a stick, 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 and then you get this thing forming in the middle, which is a concept, a construct, which is of a stick. And then when you think about that construct isn't it? It's kind of being. It's depending or it's relating to the shenwang, isn't it? Here is a thing which is dependent on its causes, which has been produced by its causes, and here in the middle is a thing called constructs, the first of the three groups, right? So here in the middle is a thing called constructs is starting to form, and if you think about it, there's a construct which really does exist, which is just a kind of a mental construct of the stick, the mental construct you have in your mind of the stick. But if you think about it carefully, there's another construct which doesn't exist, which is the theoretical, impossible one of thinking of this construct as being something which is existing from its own side through its own unique nature, and not just as a product of my conceptualization. And the lack, or the absence, or the non-applicability of that to the basis, which is the wood or the shenwang, is its yongdu. Is its emptiness, is its what we call totality, which is the third group. So you got all three groups covered in just this one process. Okay. Is it clear in your skulls or not? Okay. Got it? Got it? Did everybody get it? Did everybody get all of it? Did you get all of it? Did we? He's using the word for clear, polished. Is it polished? I think he's referring back. If you want to right now make yourself some heavy duty notes so you don't forget what just happened, better do it now. If you've got it mentally okay, you can go home and write it there. Okay, if it's pretty firm in your mind, then go when you get home, write it down. But otherwise, you better do it right now.
被想是说什么当时习惯的想啥，他讲你里不看，你们的看呢，他那个用嘛讲几不起来，他的看呢，旅行去去我不去看，看到老了他嘞，了，看着拉出不到，什么当了，你里不看看呢。他现在都是把看弟弟都把看呢，那我不现在了，什么当了，好久什么当出来。
We've taken a specific case. We've taken a specific analysis of this case. We took the stick, right? We took the baby, then we took the stick. And the stick is a specific example for this process that I've described to you. Now take that process. Now take that reasoning. And you can just apply it to all the other objects in the universe. You can go ahead, every other changing thing, every other functional thing. You can go ahead and take this same logic, this same thinking, all of the components of the same thinking, and go latch on to any other existing functional object, changing thing, and you can apply it exactly to that as well. Got it? It's okay? Yes. Okay. Ari doesn't go ahead. If you don't make a noise, I don't know if you got it or not.
The dollar in the town bench does that, Sandy soon the town bench soon
so what do you think? Did I say is to be taken figurative or literally?
Which one?
Just kidding. Just kidding. I think he's referring to when he asked you to say something, you seem to be taking it as figurative.
What I do is this. That change that you can't get to love Chong Yachar. I never over there, the never think the eat enough. Eat the Daniel collar. You teach the matrix chance. I need help watching.
A crucial point here, very, very crucial point. You know, it's not so much this one and it's not so much this point. It's the one in the middle. The very, very crucial, everything pivots, everything turns on the one in the middle. Do you understand? Do you grasp it when I say that there's a version of it which exists, and there's a version of it which doesn't exist? You got it? Okay.
That is on the Randy Tiny Matubet around the time, quite on you. He ran the Matucane. In the city that didn't deep at the ranking Matu, and the Peja love you that I would love Charm. Some day now, the Randy Tiny to keep in Numa Dina, Numa Tea, Numa, Sambi, Samlo Tiki, Toki, Shenshi, Masera, or Randy Tiny Matu, some Tamako. There are the same Matu, how for Janet in the same way. In the tower, putting something like pure. There are some kind of pure, and I was loving bus. Right there to be armored, Now,
there's a, when you focus on this second one in the middle, and somebody says to you, does this exist by definition according to the mind-only school? You'll keep saying, oh, no, scripture says, book says, Jetson Kappa says, no, doesn't exist by definition. I read it many times. Yeah, I got it. It says. It doesn't exist by definition. But to really understand what that means, to in your own mind, to have a very clear picture of what the mind-only school means when they say that one in the middle doesn't exist by definition is very difficult. And why it is that there's a new word he's introducing, which is from perceptual theory, which is the thing we think we see. The thing we think we see, okay? That thing which you think you see, which is some kind of self-existent to it, or some kind of existence by definition. To understand why that's not there, to clearly understand why this thing doesn't exist by definition, is extremely difficult. It's not as easy as saying, oh yeah, the book says, the one in the middle doesn't exist by definition. That's easy. But to really clearly grasp why the one in the middle doesn't exist by definition is difficult. But if you get it, if you ever get to a point where you get it clearly in your mind, intellectually you understand clearly why number 2 in this mind-only school doesn't exist by definition, then, says Geshe-la, you really have grasped the essential points of the mind-only school. That is the essential point of the mind-only school. If you can understand or explain clearly to somebody why the one in the middle doesn't exist by definition, then you've really grasped the whole essence of the mind-only school.
돈이 많이 기타 비리 망고지 라거 코소 가르래서는 군다다 레스에 코소 군다 레스에 군다 코다가 단다 끼되는 여기인지 군다니 뭐텔라 에 짜다 뭐는 알았으면서 내가 지금 두고 나 지라 군다 만지게 줘라 도비 텐지 거야 군다래 딱 봐래 돈이는 말아 근데 마치 남가세하고 딱 봤는데 돈이는 레면도 아 군다래 봐 지금 현다 시에주 알아서 아 시에주라 기기 군다보다 니기되는 여기니 단다 니만 디라 니기되는 여기니 군다니 뭐 직당 군다보다 니 군다니 뭐 직발이 또 대저 상로 다 가르쳐는 내가로 지중 내가 지중으로 직발이 또 이렇게
So when you think about when you talk about this one in the middle, right, the one in the middle, and you're also talking about kuntak or constructs in the sense of unchanging things, kick out emptiness, right? And all the other unchanging things in the world, which are supposed to be constructs, right? Remember how we described the group in the beginning? We said constructs is all the unchanging things in the world after you kick out emptiness itself, okay? So you go off with all those unchanging things that we always talk about, you know. We're always standing around talking about unchanging things. We go thinking about unproduced things, and we're talking about empty space, and then maybe we talk about, there's an idea that there's the unchanging thing of the mental image itself, general mental images being unchanging things. We go off and talk about other kinds of unchanging things, okay? But then, with regard to this single bamboo stick, the middle thing in the middle, the kuntak, the construct, okay? How do you feel about, like, is there a distinction between all those general unchanging things like empty space? You know, I'm not talking about emptiness, okay? But empty space, for example, place, empty space. How do you think, you know, here you've got one little tiny unchanging thing. You've got something, you've got one little tiny example of a construct. The specific example that relates to this specific stick that we're talking about. Is there a distinction between this and all those other ones with regard to their unchangingness? Is there some kind of key here that distinguishes those from this one? I remember when I was in Arhat too, you know, and I reached that 8th level, and you know, in those days it wasn't Gautama because he is Gautama, right? It was another Buddha. It was called Dipamkara. Okay, this is also Atisha's ordination name, Lord Atisha's ordination name, Mamedze. So he says, I remember back when I reached the same stage, Bodhisattva level number 8, and good old Dipamkara came up to me and said, hey, you're going to be a Buddha at a certain date. That's called Lungtemba. And then the Buddha says, do you know what was the last mental affliction I had to get rid of to see that happen? What was it? The very, very subtle way of seeing things as self-existent. Okay, the very, very subtle tendency of seeing things as self-existent. But on that, just before that moment, I stopped that last mental affliction. And then Lord Buddha Dipamkara came to me and said, Chukitin was his name at the time. Oh, Chukitin, good job. You just got rid of your last mental affliction. Now I can say that by such and such a date you're going to get enlightened. Okay. By the way, between getting rid of your last mental affliction, which is Bodhisattva Bhumi number 8, and enlightenment, which comes after 10, you still have a lot of stuff to do. Okay. Very, very subtle seeds in your mind that prevent you from seeing all objects in the universe at the same time. That's different from getting rid of mental afflictions, okay? Like, you got to go from not having any bad thoughts to seeing every object in the universe at the same time. So between there's Bodhisattva level 9 and Bodhisattva level number 10. That's, by the way, that's what you're doing between those two. But at this point, Lord Buddha can come to you and say, I predict. Actually, they do it with their foot. They put their foot on your head and say, okay, you know, okay. And you get this prediction. Now, question about the prediction. Buddha says to Subhuti, do you think I saw that as coming from its own side? Do you think I saw the act of prediction as coming from its own side? Answer? No, because then he wouldn't have got the prediction. Because getting rid of the last mental affliction, which is when you get the prediction, is getting rid of the last seed of seeing things that's coming from their own side. So it's a stupid question, right? Like, okay, I'll ask you again. This time you do better, okay? Okay, Subhuti, do you think that at the moment that Buddha Dipankara gave me my final prediction, do you think I saw that whole event as self-existent, as coming from its own side? No. Why not? Because the way I got that prediction was that I finished off my last mental affliction, which is what? The subtle tendency to see things as coming from their own side. Okay? Then the Buddha said, do you get it? I saw the three things going on as not coming from their own side. We talked about it with giving yesterday. What about with the act of prediction? The predictor, the predictee, and the predicting. None of them are coming from their own side. Okay? What does it mean in terms of the guy who just became an arhat? He just finished off his last mental affliction, right? Why is he seeing himself that way? His past karma. Past karma. He is plain old, empty, blank object, like that cylinder, the good old cylinder, okay? And his karma is forcing him to see himself getting rid of his last mental affliction and having Dipankara Buddha come say, give him an Olympic gold medal. Congratulations, you know, by this time you're going to be enlightened, you know. That's the emptiness or the dependent origination of the person receiving the prediction, okay? What about the person giving the prediction? When Dipankara wakes up in the morning and he looks down, does he see, you know, wrinkles and freckles and toe jam and things like that? No. Okay, why? He's being forced by his past karma to see his leg as an enlightened being's holy golden light, shining, deathless, beautiful, beautiful leg. Okay? That's the emptiness of the predictor. Okay? What about the predicting? You see, that's the third. You got to think of these three things. When your boss is yelling at you, you have to remember the emptiness of you. Do I want to be in this stupid office forever? No, I'm going to get to Tushita. Much better than this office. I have to be patient with this guy. What's the emptiness of the guy? I have to see this guy who's a real schmuck, you know. If I was in my Sambodhakaya, I would be seeing a Bodhisattva Arya in this same room. Got to get used to that. The last thing I want to do is yell back at him. Why is this whole thing happening to me? Why am I not in a Buddha realm surrounded by these people already? Because I didn't collect enough good karma to see it that way. Okay? It has a potential because it's empty. But I can't see it that way yet. I'm not being forced to see it that way. That's the emptiness of the person getting yelled at, the emptiness of the person who's yelling, and the emptiness of the situation. Okay? It's the same with the prediction. Okay? And now I'll stop, thank goodness. And but whenever in a situation now happens to you, you have to examine those three things. Okay? Will you examine it when something good happens? No, when something good happens, we always take credit. Okay? We don't worry about where it came from. Where does Master Shantideva start discussing emptiness big time in the Bodhisattva Charivatara? It's in the patience it's in the chapter on patience. It's on the chapter of putting up with these bosses, putting up with these other people at work. Then he starts getting big time into emptiness right there. That's where he really hits you with emptiness. So next time something negative happens, even if it's going out of this place and somebody's jostling you, you're going to think of the three elements. What are the three elements in the act of jostling? Yeah, if I had better karma, I would see somebody touching my Buddha arm, you know. If I had better karma, it would be a 10th level or high level Bodhisattva Arya touching my Buddha arm. And if I had better karma, this whole tent would be a Buddha paradise. You see what I mean? That's the emptiness of the three parts of a act of jostling. Okay? So that's the usefulness of called the core sum, the three elements or the three parts. Okay? That's how to get rid of your mental afflictions. Using emptiness. using your knowledge of emptiness. Okay? And according to Buddhism, it's the only way. It's the only way to get rid of anger and jealousy and things like that. Okay? All right, we'll stop there and then, yeah? Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about right desire and right liking?
Yeah, by the way, she said, what's the difference between correct liking and stupid liking, or intelligent liking and unintelligent liking? By the way, I did want to point out that the middle of the wheel of life, the source of all your trouble, are those three little critters. What is it? The pig is your ignorance. The pig is that you don't understand all these things. Everything I talked about, you don't understand. The snake is disliking things ignorantly. And the rooster, which used to be a pigeon, is liking things ignorantly. And in the old paintings, in the really strictly correct paintings, the rooster and the snake are coming out of the mouth of the pig, meaning that you have to see nice things as coming from their own side and bad things as coming from their own side before you can start to dislike them or like them. You see, it's the difference between step 3 or 4 or something like that. And that's why those two animals are coming out of the pig's mouth. Nowadays they paint it as a never-ending circle of, just to emphasize that as you do more bad karma, you also get stupider. All right? So they perpetuate each other, okay, like that. Difference between liking something with ignorance and liking something without ignorance, okay? Let's say you're in a relationship with another man or woman, okay? And, you know, your samsaric experience of these relationships is that there's this whole, what do you call it, courting period where you see them for the first time at a teaching at Atisha Center, and then you start talking to them during the break, and then they seem pretty exciting and interesting. Like, all those other relationships didn't go too well, but this one looks like it has a chance. And, you know, and they're kind of nice, and you talk to them, and this cycle, you know, and you meet them, and everything gets interested. You ask them out, they say yes. You meet each other, talk, gets more and more excited. It reaches some kind of peak. And then slowly you become aware that they're not as nice as you thought. And no, they start to emanate. You start to see different problems with them that you weren't cognizant of under the initial glow. And then it gets worse and worse. You have your first argument, you have your second argument. They seem to be totally unreasonable people. And then finally you have the break. Then you go to another teaching, then you meet another, you know, and then this cycle. By the way, it's not you, it's the dirty good karma, you see? It's dirty good karma wearing out. They didn't have those undesirable qualities when you met them at Atisha Center. It's not that you just didn't notice them. They didn't have them because you weren't projecting them. And then your karma started to wear out. You see what I mean? Is it possible then to have a relationship which is not samsaric? You see, is it possible to have a good kind of liking or desiring of another person? Of course, that's the goal of Buddhism. If it was not possible, then what you're saying is there's no such thing as liberation. There's no reason to study emptiness. Okay, so what would the emptiness of a relationship be? How could you get a relationship to go higher and higher and higher, and then at this point you recognize they're a tantric deity, and at this point they recognize you're a tantric deity, and then two tantric deities live together forever after happily. This is I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I'm really not kidding. That's the goal. Don't think it's not the goal. It is the goal. All the movies are right. Okay. No, it is the goal. You sense it. You feel it in your heart. You're frustrated when it doesn't work that way, you know. Somewhere between here and here, you both have to start keeping the book. Okay? That's some succession. It's some way of keeping your vows very, very strictly and checking them all the time. Somewhere between here and here, you started this practice where you started to clean up your karma. And that takes a daily regimen or a daily practice. And we're going to talk about that practice tomorrow afternoon. Very, very important. It is the basis of all tantric practice. All tantric practice is based on succession yoga. which is as corrupted as that thing I talked about with my robes, you know. I'm supposed to go out and find scraps of cloth in the garbage and sew them together to make these robes. That's the rule of the Vinaya. Nowadays, what do? We go to the Kushal Nagar. We buy the best piece of cloth we can find. We cut it up with scissors to pretend that it's pieces of cloth from the garbage, and then we sew it back together, you know. And that's why there's these patches here, you see. Tunduk sixth session has become the same. You know, real sixth session, the real engine that drives the tantric machine, that gets you to the tantric liberation in one lifetime, is this holy, sweet, incredible, extraordinary practice. And if the man and the woman started doing it here, I'm not kidding, then at this point they would just become tantric deities, and they really would live happily ever after. Chakasambara and Mrs. Chakasambara. No, I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. How do you think Chakasambara Yabyum came from? You know, where do you think they came from? You know, did God make them? You know what I mean? They were two plain old people. I'm not kidding. They were two ordinary people who started keeping their tantric vows well, and understanding their tantric vows, and understanding emptiness. And they practiced harder and harder and harder, and then suddenly just one day they are Mr. and Mrs. That's what Yabyum means. That's the whole point. That's the goal. You know? Yeah.
One person does it and the other doesn't.
She said, what if one person does it and the other doesn't? Would the person who did it, let's say that it's the man, let's say it's the lady. By the way, you just asked a self-existent question. Do you know the 14 questions that the Buddha refused to answer? They were all reasonable questions, but they were based on the questioner's belief in self-existence. You see, so he said, no matter if I say yes or no, you're still not going to, you'll still take my answer as self-existent, so I'm not going to answer you. But I will answer. But the question is based on self-existent. Now go through it in your own mind. So the lady keeps her tantric vows perfectly, understands them to the letter. Every hour, hour and a half is checking them according to the rules of Tunduk sixth session, which is required of every person who ever gets a tantric initiation. And they do it, and they keep them, and the partner is not keeping them. Okay? So then the lady starts getting higher and higher realizations. She starts to be forced by her karma to see the empty partner as Heruka, okay? Yeah, no problem. No problem there. If only one of them does it, that's fine. That one will see the other one as Mr. Chakasambara. Okay? No problem. Right after they're forced to see themselves as Mrs. Chakasambara. Okay, no problem. Really no problem. Okay? Your question was a self-existent question. Yeah.
This relates to this. Your talk last night saying to get these realizations, to be able to get to this point, to perceive emptiness, you've got to commit yourself to a teacher and serve the teacher and serve the Dharma center. Does that leave time for a relationship between two people?
He said, you know, if you do all that stuff you need to do to see emptiness directly, can you still have a relationship? Of course you can have a relationship. And there's two kinds. I mean, one is where your partner becomes a Dharma person, and that's okay. And that would be the most efficient way, because then they could come and, you know, build the stupa with you. I don't know, what's your next project, Gatala? Is it stupa? You'll come and help Gatala with the stupa. I guess all those people who get it in this course are going to come help Gatala with the stupa up there. But suppose they're not, okay? Suppose they're not interested in Dharma. What are you supposed to do? My Lama is very wise, very, very wise, very practical. And he says, look, if you break that commitment, you get in the habit of breaking commitments. You break a lifetime you vowed to be with this, if you were married, you swore that you would stay with this person the rest of your life. Next week, you meet a Lama. 2 weeks later, you want to unswear your vow. He says, very bad habit. You know, he says, stick to the vow. You have to deal with that. Make it part of your practice. Lama Supa's book, holy book, you know, transforming problems into opportunity. Take it as an opportunity. Say, okay, and don't harass the other person, and don't try to force the other person into being a Buddhist. If that's not their way, and everyone has a different way, you have to realize that. You know, the Buddha emanated, you know, many different schools, many different ways of explaining the Dharma. Don't try to force them into something that won't fit them, you know. Accept what they are, you know, encourage them in their own path, which, you know, hopefully move it up a little bit, but you have to stick to your commitments, and then use that as a part of your practice, you know, use that challenge as a part of your practice, and you won't be able to come as often to help Gyatso, you know, or else you would be breaking your other commitments. So my Lama says it's more important to learn to keep your commitments, if they are not immoral, you know what I mean, if it's not like you swore to kill somebody or something like that, but if it's a moral commitment and if you made it, then he says it's very bad habit or tendency to get into the habit of breaking your commitments. And then if you practice well, then one day they will change, you know. The reason they're not a Buddhist is whose fault? Yeah, you know, okay. All right, we'll do some prayers. Okay. That Mr. and Mrs. Chakasambhara talk is even more holy than the talk. Thank you for that. Yeah. He was using it as a bookmark for something he wanted to give us later, and he just pulled it out.
근데 축구도 삼 디긴도 용도 걸 삼당 용도 자 용도 거 배기 또에 답시 제자 지 메지 콜라 빠게 게자도 무슨 티즈 제고도 민도 봤어 니 용도 띵도 돈이고 또 같이 또 답시 제가 디마치 남가가 간데 삼당 고도 민도 이 띵이 용도 그 삼당 뒤사 데 되게 있고 찌 되는 되게 죠 코당 디마치 남가 세지 뭐 콜라 삼당 거 디띵 용도 그냥 삼당 뒤사 when
he said, is there a distinction between the one in the middle and all those other unchanging things we talk about, he says, I was not talking about whether it was unchanging or not. Okay, I wasn't talking about whether there was any difference in the way they are unchanging or not. That's not what I was getting at. That's not what I wanted to get to. It was this. When you're trying to establish the totality, right, which means emptiness of this thing, when you're trying to establish the emptiness of this stick, right, and you think of it in terms of the construct being a thing which exists by definition, right, and the fact that the construct doesn't exist by definition being the emptiness of the stick, well then, does this example of an unchanging thing called the construct of the stick, is that more useful for you in establishing the emptiness, and especially the emptiness of the stick, than thinking about all those other unchanging things like empty space and things like that? Is dending is that dending the nenga chigres. Chitang gidume chig namka and that's a le. The nenga chigres. Did the young do topala? Sing young do topala.
Martin Dinia Tangi Amare. Jay on the dictum Carson Nenga to a tip. Kunda, she will sit on Kundama, which you are. 다 도대 공대니까 또 군다 뭐에 숨어서 또 세쇼 디마치 남가서 됐어 여따야 군다에 있나야 그 대상 이거 팬도다 뭐 내가 싫어라 지기야 다 디인지 매직내 가시는 투네 아니 시험 거 아래 안돼 제가 얘네만 가라도 가서 이야기 군다 교 말이 군다 지금 원이 매직 라바 이마 이야기 라바 이마 군다 지금 뭐 시티자 가라도 군다 치마 국사요 군다 지금 원이 매직
That's so. So this clears up an incredible point. You see, it's not so useful for understanding totality or emptiness when you're just thinking about general kuntaks, right? General non-changing things, general like empty space or something like that, which is, the book said a long time ago that unchanging things were examples of constructs, and that constructs were unchanging things. After you talk about kick out emptiness, and the Buddha could have just sat there on that point and said, that's enough. I told you, constructs are unchanging, and unchanging things are constructs, except for emptiness, right? And we could have left it at that. Why did we drag in changing things? Why are we talking about changing things being the arena in which we examine the concept of constructs? There you go. Because it's a lot easier to understand emptiness if you take a changing thing as the arena in which you explore the idea of a construct. So then, by taking changing things as the arena in which you explore the idea of a construct, you can come to very easily to an understanding of their emptiness. So if you just go around being satisfied with explaining, constructs are unchanging things, empty space is an unchanging thing, empty space is a construct, that doesn't help you so much in establishing the meaning of totality or emptiness. But if you take as your arena all changing things, and then you examine them in this way with regard to this construct, the existing version and the non-existing version of this construct, then you come to this very subtle and very beautiful understanding of emptiness, which you never could have had if you didn't take shenwangs or dependent things as the arena in which we're going to discuss constructs. Ooh, that's nice. That's what I call it. If you're going to write something down, you better do it now. You might forget it. Why did we bring in Shenwan? That's a very important point. I hope somebody's taking good notes. I don't have time. That was the whole problem we started today. Is I didn't know what the heck was he talking about Shenwan? He was talking about Kundak. Why is he bringing in Shenwan?
디 군단이 와스 군단이 오더는 민게 따게 스타프게 쳐서나 가르잖아 독스레스 군다 강기 똥바 용도 시다 용도 거래. 용도 또 쪽도 값고 코에 군다 지게 와도 그에 군다. 용도 깨자시 또 코에 군다.
Koa, like Gobe.
어디 군다 들 디바지 남가다 코들 팀 밀다요. 내가 코에 군다.
That's right. Whew, this is really cool. We also distinguish we distinguish the two kinds of, remember we talked about two kinds of kuntaks, two kinds of constructs. He says, you know, in Tibetan we have a much more beautiful expression to refer to the two kinds of constructs. You know, you can call, the first one could be the one that is a, koa in Tibetan means a necessary accoutrement, okay? A necessary accoutrement for understanding the emptiness of the stick. You see? The one that you have to be thinking about to understand the emptiness of the stick. And then there's those other ones, like, you know, general kuntaks like empty space and all those other ones, you know, all those other general unchanging things, which are not necessary accoutrement for understanding the emptiness of the stick. But here, these ones, we can divide constructs in a different way, right? Rather than saying the ones that exist and the ones that don't exist, there's the ones that you have to focus on in order, which are necessary, which are a necessity or a prerequisite for understanding the emptiness of the stick. And then there's all those other ones that are not such a prerequisite for understanding the emptiness of something. Two kinds of constructs. 한 사연에 민정 씨도 민정도.
어디 내리 스타니에 근데 되는 되어도 다들 용도 뒤그 남들 용을 해셔. 슈구 전에 단다 되래셔. 너는 가를 요아인 챕터로 스테르 슈구 니슈땡아 되나. 슈구 니슈땡아 체. 이때가 이가 많이 찍다 되려는 거 같아. 계속 되려다. 슈구 chen 니슈땡아. 다 이거 chen 예다 지요. 아니 이게 나라 브라스타. 니슈땡아 체. 지니 숨시체 숨체 독선 인린이 봐. 인린이 받은 시에서 도와. 상기 똥리 군다니 로티 군다을 소네가 니까르 오다 캬바도 따바 쌈 민비스 코니 셰샤 텔레 셴비 군다셴 마송비 주제니 챵바르 어디 공지 나라 군다 과라 간다 디 카도 기기들 되게 군다 되는도 제가 아주 세워라 손도 마송 주제한테 챵바르
And again, Geshe-la wants to go back to these scriptural authorities, so you don't know, he just made up that whole last presentation, and he wants to tie it down, link it to an actual part of the text. He says, we'll go back to don't forget, we'll go back to where we were on page 23 later, but I want to jump ahead to page 25, second line, and this is the scriptural reference which backs up what I just said. Here, the text says, we are not going to now treat the other kinds of constructs. We are going to concentrate on the kinds of constructs which are the one in the middle. Okay, so here in the text itself, it says we are not in the process of identifying what constructs are. We are going to focus on this specific kind of construct, and we're not going to talk about constructs in general. We're going to use this one, which relates to establishing that other important thing. Okay. This is Jetsun Kaba's own wording for that concept. For that. And he says here at the end of those lines, we'll get into this more later. You know, I'm going to explain to you now. I'm sorry, I should have said, I'm going to explain to you now through this method what it means to be a construct. How to identify what constructs are. No, sir. When Jetsun Kapa says here, I'm going to explain to you the constructs in this light, okay, in this particular light, he does so much further on, and Geshe-la wants to show you where, because not sure we'll ever get that far in this particular series of classes, so we better jump there now. Page 85. Okay, going down to page 85. Seventh line.
길 군다라 장골라마 통과 지네 탐제 탐 남갈라 소가 도마시 여장 다 공대래 도대 공대래 마송반이 군다 강기 동바 용죽도 족비 값수 미코에서
Here is the direct quotation by Jetson Kappa, and here's how it goes. We are on page 85. We are on the 7th line from the top, and it says, generally speaking, there are kinds of constructs, other kinds of constructs. For example, all chitsens. Chitsens are like Jungian. In general, there are different kinds of. This is very difficult, but in logic, there are things like Jungian. What do they call them? Archetypes. It's a thing called like an archetype, okay? As opposed to the thing which the archetype refers to, the actual object, and that's called chitsen and unsen. So he says all those things which are called archetypes in some schools, and all those things like empty space and other kinds of unchanging things. These are unchanging things. There are many, many different kinds, but the sutra in which the Buddha explains the intent of his sutras, which is the main sutra which the MindOnly school uses, right, to back up their school, that one doesn't mention those. It doesn't talk about those. What does it talk about? Why doesn't it talk about them? It doesn't talk about them because those kinds of constructs are not the ones which are necessary accoutrement for understanding totality, meaning emptiness. And there's where, that's the later that comes on page 25. 60 pages later, you get the later, where Jetson Kappa says, this is why Lord Buddha in that particular sutra doesn't mention all those other ones when he talks about constructs. He goes straight for the ones that are necessary accoutrement for understanding the idea of totality or emptiness. Okay.
Oh, yes. What do you talk about? Could you tell me that culture or that culture?
Do you want detail or not? I said, sure. You guys are the jet set generation, and back in Tibet we didn't have any cars, we didn't have any railroad, we didn't have anything. We just plodded along at our own pace. It's okay if we go through the book like that? He did that. He said, I don't know, maybe airplane's better. What do you think? Just kidding.
Hola, you can Gunda, tell her, you're buying in Gunda, Hola, Don Shila, Gunda, Don Shis is that is Hola, course it, Benadi, Numa, oh, Yamdu Zimbi, Topa Kuki, and Yuljior, Numa Comena, is some of the Corsair. In the deep corner, you're buying in Gunda, Hola, Don Shila, Koi Gunda, Don Shila, Gunda. Yes. Tapanada, Mepaji, or anything to get a share of conscience do some of your Kakcha Katuji. Kola Kakcha, Koi Gundas, Mini Dance.
The Tonina Gobi, Tonina
Tonshi, Tonshi, what do you know? Tonshi, Tonshi, Kola Koas, Kola, but go out, could see him about it. Tapanada, what did you can run the thing in Matu, local there. Chuba Kola, Kakcha, Mama, Poran means that is a Potan.
Okay, when you talk about the one in the middle, okay, remember there's the one that exists, and remember there's the one that doesn't exist, right? The non-self-existent one and the self-existent one, right? The one that exists by definition, the one that doesn't exist by definition. Did I get that right? No. Oh, sorry, which doesn't exist by definition and does exist by definition. That's better, right? So, this one, as opposed to all those other kinds of constructs like empty space and all that, is required or is a necessary accoutrement in two senses. Okay? Necessary accoutrement in two senses. First of all, it's the positive one, the one that does exist. Okay? The one which is like really there between the mind that's thinking of the stick and the stick itself. The one in which the mind conceptualizes stick. That picture stick, right? That construct stick. That one is needed for the stick in the sense of the stick being the object which is empty. Okay? So we call it in Tibetan the construct between the stick and the mind perceiving the stick, which is necessary for the thing which is empty. Okay? Alright? It's a necessary accoutrement of the thing which is empty. Okay? So in establishing the emptiness of the stick, you're not only going to talk about the construct which doesn't exist, you're going to talk about the construct which does exist. The construct which does exist still stays in the category of necessary accoutrement for establishing the emptiness of the stick, because it's a necessary accoutrement for the thing which is going to be proven to be empty, which is the stick. Okay? So in that sense, it's still a necessary accoutrement for understanding the emptiness of the stick, because it's a necessary accoutrement for the basis, or the thing which is empty, which is the stick itself. Okay? The stick considered from the point of view of being the basis, or the thing which is empty, has to have a necessary accoutrement of the construct with which we perceive it. Okay? So that's a necessary accoutrement for that sense. Then there's the other version of the construct, which is the one that doesn't exist. Okay? A construct which could come from its own side. A construct which could exist by definition, which doesn't exist, right? That one is a necessary accoutrement for establishing the gakja. You see? That one is a necessary accoutrement for establishing what it is that we deny to reach the emptiness of the stick. Okay? So that's a necessary component or element in understanding what it is that we deny when we speak of emptiness. So in two senses, each one of the two versions or the two flavors of this construct, the one that does exist and the one doesn't exist, are both necessary accoutrement for understanding the emptiness of the stick. Okay? Got it? That's really cool.
What it is? That is the Numala, Numa, the Numa, the Carson, Mitapa, how call it? Numa, the Kieva, she will touch it. But he but keep you stay. You want to tell them, tell them all of Kunda, all of Kunda, and that
now we're shifting back into the very first mode we came to this class with. If you think about everything we've said so far, we've been talking about a state of mind which is focusing on the stick and saying to itself, this is a stick that has the mental picture of a stick, right? It's been focusing on the very nature or the very identity or the very stick as a whole, right? But what about a state of mind? Can we apply all this logic, can we apply all this reasoning to that second mode, right, that we talked about at the very beginning, which I mistook for the three features, right? We never got to the third one. You'll catch it later in the tape. There's a state of mind which says, oh, the stick is impermanent, the stick is changing, the stick is something that was made, the stick is something that was produced, which is focusing upon characteristics or features of the stick. Can you apply all of that we said so far today to the state of mind which is saying about the stick, oh, you know, the stick is impermanent. You know, the stick was produced. You know, the stick started at some point. Can you apply everything that we've said to that state of mind as well?
Oh, that is. That is Shama to the Carson. You may see you, then you must do that. You may care Barla Kunda.
This is very, very important because this is a very, very difficult phrase in Tibetan when you study Change, which is very, very difficult phrase to translate. Means the state of mind which is creating a construct, the constructing state of mind which is creating a construct with regard to a feature of its object. Okay? The constructing state of mind which is creating a construct with regard to a feature of the stick, meaning the fact that the stick grew, the fact that the stick is changing, okay? As opposed to focusing on the stick itself as an object, okay? Now it's focusing on certain characteristics or features of the stick, and that's called in Tibetan, very difficult phrase, nyuku kevala kundabi kundat. The constructive state of mind that's creating a construct about the features of the stick. And that, used to drive me crazy trying to translate that. Now you've got it. Now you've got, when you talk about all three elements with regard to perceiving the feature of the stick, that's what you're talking about.
Okay, 지금 알아서 상도 직당 누구도 찍게를 찍라. 군다 세고도 여바다 매바지 요체 먹어체. 아니 리그로 전에 가져도 없어. 누구라 상단. 대비 왜니 남가 주의샤. 거 상단 뭐 스탄 누구 거랑 자기 누구라 군다 세 군다 콜라. 아니 리 당보 리그로 전에 가져도 알아서 때는 시절에 얘는 딱 받아 뭐니 여세 잡어지라. 누구 군다 콜라 위에나 가져요.
Yes, sir. Okay, question for you guys. Wake up. Forget all those other kinds of constructs. Not talking about empty space, not talking about archetypes, not talking about anything like that. We are just talking about this one in the middle, with the stick. Okay? Restricting ourselves to this particular construct. Forget the divisions I made, or I want you yourselves to think carefully over. If we had to make a very basic, elementary, initial division of these kinds of constructs into two, you know, for example, in the way that we take all existing objects and split them into changing things and unchanging things, could you guys think up a way of taking these constructs, these particular constructs that are staying in the middle here, and dividing them into 2 or 3 broad groupings? Can you guys come up with one?
Is it just the existing categories that we're dividing?
다 유규 근다디 시기오래 유규도 매주 냄드 시기오래. Good question, and you can consider them as we want to know both, the ones that exist and the ones that don't exist. So you can take the ones that don't. You can also throw in the ones that don't exist and give me a division of those two together.
야 독소 점이 알아서 빼나 쓰라를 타발라 뭐 시비질 때 이유는 저장 매스니나 그래서 다 뭐지야서나 누구도 찍게를 군다 하고 되면은 야서는 리카즈도
So just with regard to the constructs that relate to a back scratcher stick, okay? Restrict yourself to the constructs that relate to a back scratcher stick. I want you to consider that like all of Sarah Monastery, the whole Sarah, the population of Sarah Monastery. And then you grab all these guys and you say, you're members of Sarah J, and you grab all these guys and say, you're members of Sarah May, and you come up with 2 great groupings. Can you come up with one? How many groupings are going to, I mean, how many are going to be in your group? I mean, are there going to be 2, 3, 4? Yes. Let's hear what they are.
The object itself, the and the characteristics of the object. Seeing the
Shingi ngola jagyu kundata shingi kebala jagyu
labeling
kundani.
the object as a physical thing and labeling it as
Features.
The features. Of
Yeah,
it.
shingi ngola jarwe kundata shingi kebala jarwe kundani suyenas. Are you their legally elected representative, or would the people like to talk?
Yeah, like the produced one and the stick, right?
Say again?
Like what she just said is the one that's produced. You know, like there's stick, and then the one that's changing. The like there's the thing that's changing. Then you're like changing object. You know, like.
Da dus samlotana kundati mitap kunda korana mitapares. That's difficult. Kundas don't change. Kuntape lo de mitaparawa. Ani kunda damenda shayongres. Kunda dinji sorry damenda shayongres. Dinji korana gyogi chigi dus da kechig mechigi kunda de da gyungi kunda.
짜라 코도 로가 소리 그 군다 치면 또 말아서 딱 미딱 받지 마 유리 깨치치만 유단 다 말고 짜라 로가 해서 그 군다 디 군다
I think he's saying, look, everything has their own constructs, right? And there are lots of different constructs. But with regard, I think what he's trying to say is that with regard to one object's constructs that at a certain given moment, and not talking about how the different constructs might arise as different constructing minds arise. Just at any given, I think what he wants to say is at any given moment, the construct of any given moment, which doesn't change, you see, Can you give me divisions of that one?
I think I'd follow Christy and say the thing which is the basis of having features, and then the features about the thing that is.
Kepaki shirgyupe chichengi kunda tedan digi kechegi kunda nisu yana kanedus.
다 알리가 지니 다 거의 다 무슨 일을 저는 이 퀄리티 두 가지 되나요?
He wants to make sure that your point was addressed to your satisfaction, because he sees you kind of looking like that, you know.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
What did he said? Say it again. What you said?
He's talking about the construct of the whole piece of wood. You know, when you say wood,
Right.
and then the construct of when you focus on wood and say the wood is impermanent, or the wood is changing, or the wood is breaking, or something like that.
Right.
Is that what you meant to say?
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Ingay several love mena and the Korangi love and chipares. The pena shingi ngodang shingi mitapalas ding in line.
저는 그런 군다하고 어느 군다서 꼭 깨지면서 찍기 보여서
So it wasn't the case that you meant to say that the mental construct of a piece of wood, or the mental construct of the piece of wood as a changing thing, was itself changing all the time. You didn't mean to say that. Oh, di mitapares nga love mess. Okay, that's the one. Good. So you're both in the same chikpachari. Koni chikpachari.
딱 그래서 내가 현다 해야 말이야.
That's it.
그냥 코랑 도바시는 도바고 찍 마주는데 코랑 그냥 깔아채도.
나네.
그래서 배샤데 저걸 배샤 만드는 야고요. 도바 이제 좋았다 그냥 하고 싫어. 나 배샤 티티. 카트랑이 주는 그 스탄 북스 로나에 그 람나 그 삼스탄하러 삼스탄 람은 다 되잖아.
He says he likes it when somebody has a problem with something he said and is doubting and is trying to figure it out, is obviously having a question about it, and is obviously trying to work something out that they don't get that maybe other people can. It's not like I can hand out paychecks to everybody and refuse you a paycheck. You have to, you have just as much. You should, in fact, raise your questions and chase your question until it's resolved. And I much prefer that in my classes than people who are sitting there, like that, and not bringing up any issues at all. I love issues, and I love people who bring up the issues. And in my class, I want people bringing up issues rather than sitting there, okay. That's all. Did I check checking is? Because Ari doesn't do the other. Dangan didn't run checking is. Catch it, cheer doesn't learn.
마신 받고 시험 보고 알았어. 간에 싸움 땅데 간가도 시험 받잖아요. 아니 그가지 배트만. 마신 받 시험 봐서야 된다. 마신 받 야지 땅. 아니 파시 추시 파시. 감정진 니네 시행에 참.
The whole point of a class is to go from a state of non-understanding to a state of understanding, and there's another state in which people sit, which is repeating like parrots what I say and not really understanding it. And since the whole point of the class is to go from a state of non-understanding to a state of understanding, and since exchange is required for that, going back and forth on an issue until the issue is resolved is required for that, I like issues and I like resolving issues, and we just resolved an issue. So you both, all right. In fact, you're all three right. When you say that there are two kinds of constructs, if you think about it, there's a construct which is constructed with regard to the central or the main nature or main identity of an object, and then there's a construct which is constructed with regard to the features of that object, and you got it. Okay.
야 누구 그래 되우샤. 다 뭐라 꾼다 코랑랑 쟤나 양 가지도. 누구 짱짱아. 뭐라 꾼다 가지도.
With regard only to this back scratcher stick, this piece of bamboo, and with regard now we are restricting ourselves to the construct which is being constructed with regard to its main identity, not to its features. How many of those? Remember we divided them into constructs which are constructed with regard to the main thing. And then we talked about constructs which are constructed with regard to the features of the thing. Now forget the second one, just the first one. Constructs which are constructed with regard to the main thing. How many of those are there? How many divisions are you going to give me on those? Don't forget, you're 3. Who's that number? Who said 2? Let's hear the 2. Give them a name, you know. You got an abbot, you got to name the abbot.
There's the construct that you construct that doesn't really exist, and there's the gotcha. The construct where you think the thing exists for its own self.
Okay, we got your 2. We want to hear the 3 that this one brought up here. If she's already covered 2 of yours, you could just throw in the 3rd. Let's forget it. It's 2. It's 2. Exactly that. The one which exists and the one which doesn't exist. The one which does exist, okay, in this case, with this example, is the one which is a necessary accoutrement of the object which is going to be proven to be empty. The object which is said to be empty, which is the stick itself. And then the one which doesn't exist, okay, the construct which doesn't exist, is going to be the one which is said to be a necessary accoutrement of the gakcha, or which is necessary for establishing the gakcha. The thing which emptiness is empty of. So you guys can figure out easily that this same divisions can be carried on to the constructs which relate to the features of the object, right? The same 2 divisions that we just mentioned can be applied to the constructs which relate to the features of the object. So we go through the whole process, which is very hard for me to remember when he's going through it. We go through the whole process with the kid, right? Let's go back to the kid. Remember the kid and the whole process of naming the kid. So there is a construct which relates to the kid. During the naming of the kid, there has arisen a construct named Tashi the kid, right? The kid named Tashi. That construct has arisen. It is only something that is a projection, or it is only something which is a construct of the mind. But that's not to say it doesn't exist, okay? It does exist. The construct does exist, okay? And then with regard to this construct, we can say that the fact that we can say of this construct that it's not something which exists from its own side, with its own unique nature. Yeah, but there's something else about it. He said, yeah, this construct is only something which is a construct of the mind first, okay? And the fact that it's, and then the second step is that it is not something that comes from its own side with its own unique nature. And in this example, what we said was, it was not something that came along with that kid the minute he was born out of the womb, okay? That middle thing, the construct, was not something that popped out when the kid popped out of the womb, okay? So the construct that's a sign that the construct is not something which is coming from its own side with its own unique nature. That's an indication that it really is just something that is a construct of our mind, because it only happened later when the daddy said, oh, now I'm going to name this boy Tashi. So the construct, in being something that did not pop out of the womb along with the baby, is therefore not something which comes from its own side through its own unique way of being. That's a sign that it doesn't come from its own side with its own unique way of being. And that's an indication that it is only a construct of the mind. The fact that it didn't come along with the baby from the first moment. And that's an indication, or that's what it means when we say that that thing doesn't exist by definition. That's what it means when we say that that thing doesn't exist by definition. And the fact that that doesn't exist, the fact that a construct which does exist by definition is something that could never apply to the boy, is the yongdu, or the totality, or the emptiness of the boy. Okay? The fact that there could never be a concept which did exist by definition, or which did come from its own unique way of being, which applied to the boy, is the very emptiness, or what we call totality in the mind-only school of the boy. And